Hi, I'm Peter Charles, and let's talk today about rod actions. And if you've looked at websites or looked at brochures or talked to people, you're going to hear lots of different words used to describe rod actions. And the trouble is, for manufacturers, is how to put engineering terms into layman's terms and have them make sense. And the trouble is, different companies do it different ways. Different people use the same term to describe different things. It gets very confusing. And I don't blame the average newcomer to the sport going, what are they talking about? And why is that important to me? And what should I be buying for my fishing? And yeah, I can understand why that's a problem. So let's get into what's happening here and what's going on. You'll hear the terms fast and slow. And what that really refers to is recovery speed. So a rod that's slow loads slowly, unloads slowly, recovers slowly. And a fast rod loads fast, fires fast, recovers fast. Now, these also happen to be synonymous with stiff and slow. Stiff rods tend to be fast recovery. Slow rods, soft rods, I should say, tend to be slow recovery. So people tend to use fast and slow as being synonymous with stiff and soft. And you can also understand why companies don't want to use stiff and soft to describe their rods. That gets into a different territory we don't want to get into. So fast and slow really means also not just recovery speed, but also stiffness. And today in our modern graphite rods, we don't really have slow rods out there. Very few rods are going to be described as slow. They're going to be moderate to moderate fast to extra fast. Those are the terms you're going to see used most. Because in graphite rods, moderate in the old bamboo terms is about as slow and soft as they get. And then we move up the list to something that can be considered extra fast. So, oh, that's cool. Now you got that part, that fast means stiff, moderate to slow means soft, and also the recovery speed. But, okay, is there anything else that we should worry about? Well, there's also the taper of the rod. And the taper of the rod really dictates where it does most of its bending. So, I have this very expensive demo rod here that cost me a fortune, but the warranty's good. And I'm going to use it to demonstrate what these actions look like. So you have a rod that does most of its bending in the upper third. So when you put it on, well, it's a little bit too much. There we go, back it off. There we go. So under a moderate load, it kind of looks like this. This is what we'd call a tip action rod, tip flex rod, the different versions of the term out there. And what this really means is this rod has a very, very delicate tip. And what does that do for us? Well, it protects very light tippet. So if you're using 7X or 6X tippet, I mean 7X can get down to 2-pound test. And you cast a dry fly out there and you hook into a big trout and you tighten up on the big trout, you can snap that tippet just like that if you had a rod with a very stiff tip. So it will protect fine tippets. It also loads quickly at short distances and loads very smoothly, and you get a very definite feel of the load when you're casting at short distances. So if you're going, anywhere from 20 to 40 feet, beautiful, bang. Also accuracy. These rods tend to be very accurate. You've just got a little bit of bending going on. You can be very accurate when there's just a little bit of bending happening. You can be very quite precise with your casting. So when you're trying to get that, that fly into that little spot, that's the kind of action you want. But there's no free lunch in this business. Everything's a compromise. So what do you lose? Well, I won't say you can't cast these rods far, because you can, but you really have to be on your game to really cast a rod with a tip action any kind of real distance. I mean, good casters can do it, and I have a shootout where I show you I'm casting two different kinds of rods, a regular taper and a light presentation taper with a very soft tip. And yeah, I was able to cast a soft tip 75 feet. But the point of the matter is I had to pay a lot more attention to my casting. And some rods just won't do it. I mean, I don't care what how good a caster you are. There's some rods just like, that's it. I'm getting around 60 feet, I'm good. Don't bother me for anything more. And that's fine, because the way the rod is designed with that very delicate soft tip, it's really being designed for that pinpoint accuracy to be able to cast to a rising trout that's 25 feet away, and then when you tighten up on the trout after it's taken your fly, it doesn't break your tippet off. And that's what that rod is about. It's accurate, it's delicate, finesse presentations. You know, it protects fine tippets, but it sacrifices distance. And it also tends to sacrifice the ability to fight a big fish. And when I'm talking about big fish, I'm talking fish bigger than what we'd find in a typical trout stream. I mean, like a 25-pound salmon. You're not going to try to fight it on a rod like that. So when we go to the next level, we're talking about rods that bend more in the middle to the butt. And when we're talking about rods that bend more to the middle of the butt, sort of like this, under a moderate load, what does that do for us? Well, a rod that bends like this will enable us to cast for distance very easily. And because we're pushing the load down to the butt section where the rod is thicker and stronger, we're able to handle big fish. But you're not going to protect a fine tippet on that. I mean, you know, typically when you're streamer fishing, you're using 3X, 2X, 1X. If you're saltwater fishing, you're using 10, 15, 20 pound, 25 pound test line for your leader. You don't have to worry about protecting a fine tippet. You've got a strong enough tippet there that you can really put the wood to the fish and the tippet will hold. But what you get with that action is easy distance. It loads easily when you have a lot of line back there. You can cast a lot of line, or you can cast one of those overweight lines. And you can when you cast, you can put more power into the cast, and it just delivers more distance. So, I mean, when you have that kind of action, it really works for you for distance. So now what I'm going to do is I got 4 rods here, and I'm going to show those 4 rods to you and talk about their action and how that impacts our fishing. Okay, I'm going to start off with an NRX Plus LP 4-weight 8.5 footer. This rod has a very fine, very delicate tip. It's designed for trout fishing at short to medium distances. It will protect fine tippets. It's very accurate, and it's beautifully precise, and it loads beautifully with very light loads. And that's what we want in a trout rod where we're casting dry flies to rising fish that are 20 feet away. We don't need this big, beefy, muscular rod that can cast into the next county. And this is what this kind of rod delivers. So if you're after trout fishing at short to medium ranges and you want to fish dries and you want to fish delicate tippets like 6X and 7X, and you want to be able to put a fly in on a little spot cast to a little tiny window, this is the sort of rod you want. A rod with that delicate light tip. Now, this is more of a moderate fast action rod. It's not super stiff. It will bend quite easily into the butt section. So when you're fighting a fish, it's bending smoothly through the butt, because rod action is not just about casting, it's also about fish fighting. So that tip protects the fine tippet that you're using, but also the butt section bends quite deeply when you're fishing, fighting a big fish, and it enables you to actually work the fish quite well, even with a relatively light rod. So it does a good job with typical freshwater trout and small bass and that sort of thing. It'll do a lovely job. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, this is the NRX Euro nymphing rod. It's a 10-foot 4-weight. Euro nymphing rods are designed to cast weighted flies. They don't expect to cast the fly line. You're not using the fly line to load the rod to cast the flies. You're using the flies themselves to load the rod and cast the flies. So as a consequence, this rod has to have a tip that's light enough and quick enough to cast just the flies. And we're not using a lot of line to cast the flies. In fact, we're not using any line, we're just using the leader. But, however, the butt section and the midsection of this rod is quite stiff. It's 10 foot long. So if it was a softy toffee, it would kill the action of the tip. So if you're having that very light, quick tip, you need to back it up with the stiff midsection and a stiff butt section in order for that light tip to work for you. And that also gives us the ability to handle a bigger fish. Because generally speaking, this is not always true, but it's often true that when you're nymphing, you're likely to encounter a bigger fish than when you're dry fly fishing. I mean, yes, really big fish come up and take dry flies, yes. But, you know, when you're nymphing, you're more likely to encounter one. So this has a very powerful butt section, both for the casting, and it also will handle a big fish as well without any problem. But you have the light tip that will protect a fine tippet. So if you're nymphing with 6X or 7X, this rod will protect it. And you've also got the advantage because you have a longer rod with a powerful butt section that if you put a regular fly line on this and you went for distance, it wouldn't do a bad job. It do a pretty good job, actually. I've actually tried it. It's reasonably good at longer casts. Especially being 10 foot long, it makes it easier. But the way this rod is designed to cast the nymphs. And those nymphs don't weigh very much compared to the weight of 30-foot of fly line. So you're not getting a long distance out of a couple of light nymphs. So this rod will do that job for you quite well. And it's designed with that very, very fast action, very quick, light tip to be able to get those nymphs out there with just bang, they're gone. So that's how this rod is designed, to cast weighted nymphs rather than cast the fly line. And it has the tip section to do it and the butt section to do it. So let's look at the next one. This is the Asquith 9-foot 6 weight, and it's my smallmouth, my big streamer rod. If I was going out west on a big river that's very windy, I'd take this rod as well. It is a very, very progressive action in the sense that it bends all the way to the butt section when you flex it. However, it is a relatively stiff rod. It is not a soft rod by any stretch of the imagination, yet it bends very deeply. And this is one of the misconceptions I run into all of the time. People think that a rod that bends to the handle has to be soft. No. You can have a rod that bends to the handle and still be quite stiff like this one. This is a relatively stiff rod. And what that type of action does for us, that it bends all the way to the handle, is it casts for distance very, very easily. The first time I picked this rod up, I put an Airflow Distance Pro line on it, a 6-weight Distance Pro line on it, and cast a full measured 100 feet. All right, so a rod with this kind of action will cast very far, very easily. If you need to cast distance, this is the kind of action you want. And it's going to be wonderful for casting streamers a long way, even wet flies a long way. But if you had to protect a fine tippet or had to cast very short distance, very tight, this is not the rod for you. You know, that NRX Plus 4-weight that I just showed you is the type of rod. So this is a rod, big rivers, big fish, big flies, you know, where there's smallmouth bass or trout, and you can cast a very long way and it'll do a wonderful job. So let's look at the next one. Okay, now we're into the saltwater category. This is NRX Plus saltwater 8-weight. Typical of saltwater rods, it's relatively stiff, pretty stiff. Some saltwater rods are stiffer than this. This is by saltwater standards, this is a moderately stiff rod. There are stiffer ones out there, but it's stiff by freshwater standards. And it does most of its bending in the upper 2/3 of the rod when you're casting, with just a little bit of bending into the butt section. And the reason for that, this has a powerful butt to be able to fight big fish. Because if you've ever been saltwater fishing before, trust me, they can put a big bend in your rod. They're very powerful fish. So, and you can get into some pretty big fish. So you want a rod with some lifting power, a rod that can let you fight a really big fish. But the rest of the rod will allow you, the rest of the action will allow you to cast far easily, handle big wind, handle big flies, handle overweight lines. These are all the types of things that a rod like this has to handle. So if you're going saltwater fishing, you're going to need a rod that is going to have that kind of action, that's going to have a powerful butt to lift fish. You're going to need a rod that will handle a lot of different wind conditions that you can really be able to cast far. Sorry, let me fix this. Oh, we don't want that blue thing looking at us. So that's what we're after with this kind of rod, is a rod that will cast far easily, because you're casting a lot in saltwater fishing. You're casting really far. You are having to handle wind. You have to handle pretty big flies sometimes. And you can't do that with a rod that's built for delicacy. It's just not going to work. So when you go shopping for salt water, you're looking for that combination of easy distance and that powerful butt section for fighting big fish. You don't have to worry about the tippet. We're using powerful tippets, 12, 15, 20, 25 pound test tippets. We're not using 6X and 7X. Not a worry. So let's wrap this up. So to recap, you're looking at rods that are fast, which are stiff. You're looking at rods that are moderate, which are moderate stiffness, moderate recovery speeds. And you're looking at slow rods, which are soft rods and have slow recovery speeds. You're also looking at rods that have different tapers. Some rods do most of their bending in the tip section, some on the middle 2/3, some all the way to the handle. Those rods will give you different fish fighting characteristics, and the tip action ones will allow you to protect fine tippets. The ones that have stronger butt sections will allow you to put a lot of pressure on fish and land big fish. When it comes to casting distance, those light, soft tips, yes, you can cast them relatively far, but you have to be careful and you have to be on your game to do it. You can easily throw a tailing loop with a rod like that. So you have to be careful when you're casting them to put just the right amount of power in, the right amount of timing to get them to go. When you're talking about the other rods that bend closer down the blank to the handle, closer to the handle, further down the blank, and their tips are stiffer, those rods are easier to cast for distance. And you have no trouble. You don't have to be on your game if you're a little bit off, or if the wind is blowing, or whatever the case may be, whatever your problem is, the rods will get the line out there anyway. As long as your technique is reasonably good, you'll get some good distance out of them. And they have the power to handle the big fish. So keep that in mind when you're shopping. What's your purpose? Am I delicate trout, moderate distance smallmouth, big distance, big fish, big wind? And then you look at the action you want. Do you want that delicate tip for accuracy and protection of tippets? Do you want the power in the butt section for lifting fish? Do you want the easy casting? And then you get the action that does that job. So remember that the first time you go shopping for a rod. It's not just fast and slow. There's more to it than that. But it's not that complicated when we get right down to it. So keep that all in mind. Cheers.